Now I'll invite Chris. Chris is another procurement expert. He's traveled for us from up north to come for the class. Chris is leading the procurement at Aurelius Group. So I'll let Chris talk more through what he does there and how he's actually, what he's doing for, I don't want to steal his thunder, so I'll let him only speak a bit more detail, but he's really going to talk through the procurement practices and how they're servicing the private equity, the companies that the Aurelius Group acquires and how they really go about it. So again, it's a real example of how it actually done in practicality, right? So over to Chris. Yeah, just put it, just it's on, just plug it in here or whatever.
And change slides on that one. Yeah?
No, change slides. Just,
Okay.
just green.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So as we kind of briefly touched upon there, I work for Aurelius, which is a Munich-based private equity firm, about 20 years old. I've worked with them for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I worked in procurement consultancy for the last 8 years. I got approached by Aurelius and said, would you like to come and work for us as a private equity company? And having worked in various different procurement consultancies for a while, I was a bit like, this sounds a bit different. What does this mean? What do you want me to do for you exactly? So they said that they buy lots of companies, specialize in carve-out, special situations, and their approach to improving their portfolio companies was to have an internal operational task force. And that's what I was going to talk about today, because actually I think listening to some of the presentations you've already had, there's some real clear synergies with how we go about the due diligence, because a lot of the companies that Aurelius acquire, or that we're kind of moving into a different space at the minute, is in that 50 million to 500 million spend profile. And actually what we typically find is they're the unloved aspect of a business, and therefore technology and process improvement and even talent investment just doesn't exist. So suddenly day one we arrive and it's like, what are we going to do? Okay, so I'll take you through this now. Apologies, Aurelius decided to change their slide templates last week and told me that I had to use them, so that was a bit of a stress when I put this together. So as I say, okay, so that's moved around a little bit, but we can deal with that. So yeah, as I said, Aurelius has been around for 20 years. We currently have 27 companies in our portfolio, and we recently acquired our biggest, and we refer to it as our whale, about a month ago, which is McKesson UK, which for you guys probably more familiar with the retail arm of McKesson UK, which is Lloyd's Pharmacy. Okay, so they're a huge organisation, but typically we would work in that smaller space, and you can see some of the brands there that you may or may not recognise. And when we acquire these companies, we have now a standardized toolkit that we use to do what we call a post-deal integration program, to work with these businesses to deliver excellence in their procurement. And it's not just procurement. I don't want to sort of steal the thunder just on procurement. We also have task force in IT, finance, sales and marketing, and there's one other which I have written down somewhere. IT, somewhere. Oh, and finance, procurement. Yes, I've covered them all there. Apologies. And we all arrive day one on the new investment, work together, come up with a strategic plan for that business, and then try and deliver a procurement excellence program in my sort of role. And as you can see there, there's a large task force. Sorry, I thought you could point with this thing for a second. So on that right hand side, you've got the operating partners, manager operations, functional experts. So that's where I currently sit. And we arrive day one and we do the due diligence piece. So we're looking at organizational design, procurement strategy, ERP tools, technology. Quite often that one's pretty bare actually when we get there. But and then we set about a 6 to 9 month program to work with our exec board and vice presidents to say, this is how we start the transformation program. Typically, if I just move that on, as I said, in that post-deal integration phase, we're doing a 3 to 4 week program where we literally look under every rock. So where are the skeletons? Where are the top 10 suppliers that ultimately haven't felt the love? Managing working capital is a huge thing. A lot of these investments are in a position where credit insurers are looking to back away. So we work quite closely on that side of things, looking to give a savings bump. Now, on the indirect side of things, we've got great purchasing power. So that side of things isn't too complex. But when I'm on the direct side of things, a little bit more complex. So last 18 months, I've bought ceiling tiles, I've bought tank wheels, and I've bought breast implants. So not too much synergy there. So what we're having to do is we're having to bring out our procurement toolkit and share those experiences, knowledges, work with the guys that have probably bought these items for 7, 8 longer years, and try and standardize their processes, introduce the idea of better reporting. So we've talked a lot about technology already, but actually we use really simple tools, and Microsoft make it really easy for us now. So we've got a standard suite of Teams reports that we use, and SharePoint lists is a really good tool to create dashboards, and even geomaps in terms of where your supply chain is, preferred supplier lists. All these sort of things can actually be implemented quite quickly. And actually the devil is in the detail. How you bring it all together, how you make sure that people are using it, because quite often in the current investment I'm working on, which is a mechanical and electrical contracting business, engineers always seem to think they know how to do procurement better than procurement professionals. I think I understand why, having trained as an engineer myself, I've kind of fallen into that, but they always seem to think that. So making sure that people actually know that we're there to deliver the value and want to stick to policies and processes, etc. So yeah, we get the savings bump, as I already talked about. Then we're looking to make sure we ensure business continuity or mitigating supply chain risks. I think there's a lot of that going around at the moment. And I think the savings projects are less bonus orientated, shall we say, anymore. The days of delivering 10x on your salary to say that's the savings probably gone now. But cost avoidance, business continuity, they're absolutely critical for our investments at the moment to ensure that we hit the EBIT figures that we post in our strategy. And then it's about the organization itself. So a lot of the time we will restructure, we will bring in fresh talent, coach the talent that they've got. And then we're finally in a landscape where we can start to look at external tools. So we've just implemented a new specialist construction ERP tool at my current investment. And all of these ERP tools are bringing their own procurement tools now. So you've got supply management modules, you've got requisition tools. But that's really straightforward. It's software, right? You can program software, in a couple of months. Where our challenge is programming the people, because ultimately they've done things a certain way, and change for people is always the biggest challenge. So it's working with the software and the individuals to make sure that there's buy-in, because that's where the value is for me, is actually the synergy between technology and people and it working. So yeah, as I said, we talked about the post-deal integration program. Then we start to look at more complex elements where we can support with our SME team. So things like VAVE, should cost modeling, all the direct levers. So we typically do cost saving lever workshops with every business we go to get all the stakeholders, not only from procurement, but also the senior management team of the whole business. Really give procurement that platform that it is a real business change aspect. I mean, the amount of investments I go to, and I sit with the senior management team, and on the first week they say to me, really get procurement. I think you guys do a great job. but it's always number 12 on my top 10 list. And I'm like, oh my God, why is that the case? And it's only when you start to get the people to buy into what you're doing and making their life easy that then they suddenly, oh, and one other thing, get them focused, because, you know, there is other things going on, but get them focused, get the buy-in, show them the journey, then you start to get there. So yeah, we deliver this program very successfully at all of our investments, although it is quite easy to be successful when you are the voice of the shareholder and they kind of have to do what you have to say. But we try not to remind them of that fact unless we need to. Yeah, so just a bit of a sort of summary there. So we do get involved pre-acquisition. So we try to get as much data as we can, do interviews with business stakeholders, try and build the spend queue before we've even made the acquisition, so we can feed into the bid case as to why Aurelius should make that acquisition. And as I said, we start to use tools like Power BI, as you can see there. But quite often that information is just not, you can't get it before the deal because there's so many moving parts. And also, it's definitely the poker stage of any investment in terms of what they want to give away. And then this is where we really start to earn our corn, which is the post-deal integration assessment. So as I already talked about, we're doing the workshops, we're reviewing the organization structure, and then we're really starting to implement those cost-cutting measures, whether that's headcount projects, whether that's should cost modeling, whether that's new technology. Ultimately, every investment is different, and it's just about using experience, knowledge of the procurement market to take that forward. And one of the journeys we've been on as a business is when I first joined, we had a procurement practice of 3, and I was the only one in the UK. And we worked with what we call special situations, which is usually businesses that are pretty close to going bust. So it's quite interesting, definitely interesting. I remember telling it to one portfolio company, which I won't name, when we had to find £1 million in a week. But you know, we did what we thought was best as procurement professionals there, but we've now gone on this huge journey over the last 4 years while I've been there, and we've standardized our toolkit. We've given an approach which is more, what's the best word to describe this? Accommodating to the team that's already there, so we don't create that conflict straight away. And it's a lot more aligned with what the consultancies are doing. But I think what's important is we're completely agnostic to what's out there. And I think that's really important for everyone to understand, is that I agree with what we said earlier. A lot of consultancies, and I can think of a couple already, will push me down a certain way. And if they start doing that, that's an instant turn off. Do your own research, the tools are always evolving, and also see what's out there for free, because you can do a lot with that. It's typical that these free softwares will then go, right, you can do so much with this, but now you have to pay for it, but that's fine. You know what you need to use and buy into that. And then it really does deliver quick results. I mean, the reason we've been able to move away from these special situations is because of the success we've had as an organization, and the businesses are getting bigger and bigger, and all we're doing is building up our practice more internally. So working with externals is very much on our terms, as much as they would like to be preferred partner of choice, like a lot of our private equity competitors. So yeah, I didn't want to talk too much today because I didn't know how much people knew about private equity and how they kind of worked. But in essence, that's an overview of Aurelius. We were probably a bit unique in terms of our approach to things like procurement. I think a lot of other private equity companies are now starting to copy us. Well, I certainly get that feel, the amount of messages I get on LinkedIn about, well, are you interested in doing something similar with us? So probably open the floor to some questions about Aurelius and some of the stuff that we do. Good.
There we go.
Oh, look at that.
It's loud. So when you go into these new situations, where do you typically find, from a soft area, what do you find is the most difficult, when it comes to kind of going and doing a procurement assessment and, getting to a solution that's actually going to be rolled out?
So, really good question, actually. Number one, always day one, they think you're there to take your job. I think everyone finds that experience. But as I usually explain to them, I'm quite happy with the job I've got. But then after that, it's always data. I think I said during the presentation, we quite often acquire aspects of businesses that have been unloved, and therefore, not only has it not had the attention to evolve the systems that they've got, but also if they even don't follow those processes, I don't think anyone is really questioning it or pushing back. A lot of the investments that I put up on the screen, the ERP tool we acquire is green screen, almost like MS-DOS style thing. So data extract is always the number one problem. And actually, after you get through that stage of they don't want my job, the people aspect is probably the easiest, because suddenly they're now working for an organization that has gone from unloved to now it has to work. So all these ideas start flowing really, really quickly, and you can get really good momentum. So there's an example of what's really bad, but also what can be really good with some of these investments. Yep. I think there's a button as well. You have to. Yep.
Hi. Yeah. Two very quick questions. First one, which is I learned about in the environmental side about this term, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know from yourself, has there been any situations in this company or any other places where the company might have ignored the consequences, which they might have foreseen, and then you had to come in and say, hey, look, you can't ignore it anymore because, it's literally around the corner, so you have to bear up to it. And then the other thing you said, you're working, is it on the pharmacy side, is it?
Yes, so our recent acquisition, McKesson, is in pharmacy.
Right. So connected to that, a lot of that the talk in the environmental space is plastic and plastic packaging for the pharmaceuticals and everything. Is that an issue in terms of environmental? Because packaging is the main thing, the plastic packaging. So what is it, something that is to be sourced from recycled sources, or how do they come and approach that?
So let me answer the second question first. ESG is a topic that I think a lot of private equity firms are really wrestling with a little bit, because and Aurelius is definitely one. We had a company away day last week, and ESG was a topic that probably generated the most questions. And the reason why it's a wrestle, because obviously it's about generating profit for the shareholders and the fund. But then equally, when we're acquiring carve-out situations, they all are asking, what is our ESG strategy? And that's quite often a conflict. In terms of the projects we've got at the moment, we're actually not encountering too many ESG challenges with the majority of our portfolio. The one where it's most prevalent is the one I'm currently working on, which is a company called Enerveo, was formerly SSE Contracting and Rail. And we do a lot of work with local authorities, so PFI, street lighting contracts, etc. And they're very keen on not so much the packaging side of things, although I definitely see it. I did a 3-year stint with GSK, and we definitely had that as on our agenda 7 years ago. So they were already far more mature in the sort of industry compared to others. But I'm talking about M&E with this business, and the local authorities are questioning what our strategy is. And I will hold my hands up and say there was a huge scramble to be what do we do here, because they want to know about waste. They want to know what the full supply chain is. They want to know how it is impacting our people. And I think a lot of people are playing catch up really quickly, and probably pharma is ahead of all the other industry.
Would that have been the unintended consequence?
That would be the unintended consequence.
They've had to bear up to.
Yeah, and I think Aurelius is probably one that's dealing with some of those consequences as well at the moment, because the way they like to operate probably doesn't have a clear synergy with a lot of people's ESG strategy, and they realise that they've got to change.
Thank you.
No, thanks for your question.
Sorry, it's just building on the ESG question, because I think, as you say, private equity in the past had a great experience of taking cost out, and the ESG doesn't always take cost out, and just not necessarily for yourself, but where do you think the private equity industry is on recognising, okay, there's an implication here that we've got to face into?
Interesting question, and with one that came out last week actually, and this isn't a procurement answer, so apologies, but the private equity market is getting quite saturated. There's a lot of people going into it. It's, you know, returns of, I think on average is about 13% for any investment, which when you look at other ways of investing your money, that's far higher. So when it becomes more saturated, what is your USP? What's your point of difference? So it seems like Aurelius' strategy is to get ahead of the curve on ESG. I don't think they know fully where that curve's going to take them. And therefore that will allow them to keep doing the deals that they are able to do, because ultimately, as the market gets more saturated, the price to buy these companies is going up and the return on them isn't as high. So that 30% comes down. So you've got to have a point difference. And I think whoever gets there first in terms of something that makes sense for ESG within the private equity space, because it's definitely a conflict. I think you said not as high returns. I think it's definitely a full-on battle. So that's Aurelius's stance at the moment. And I think they've got a lot of learning to do. I think everyone has. I mean, we talked about pharma just a second ago. They were, my time at GSK, they were far and away. But even then, they create conflict in the supply chain, right? They create these pre-qualification questionnaires for tenders, and then you're asking people to go against political rationale for various choices. So that automatically that you're put in a position where it doesn't make sense.
Sorry, I don't think actually it's just a private equity issue.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you look at CFOs, CEOs, and the challenges they're looking at to say, how do I get return for shareholder when I'm only making 3-4%, you know, return, and the ESG is going to add cost in. It becomes probably you're in a better place than you might realise.
Thanks for the question. Anyone else?
Yeah. We did a bit of work with Blackstone Group a few years ago. All companies that spent over X millions came together for group sourcing activities. Do you go down that road at all?
We don't. Again, this is a bit of a tussle that we've had in recent months as some of the acquisitions have got larger. We are quite strong with our preferred supplier list in the UK. And we've got a list of suppliers across certainly most of the indirects, maybe not so much the directs, given the range of industries that we work in. But on the indirect side of things, we are able to get good leverage across frameworks, not combined contracts. And I think that's one of the nervousness that we sometimes approach with some of the acquisitions that we made, certainly on the smaller side, is that they don't want to be bundled in case one of the larger aspects of that contract exits. And also, one of the things I measure the suppliers on our preferred supplier list on is not just cost, but is their responsiveness. Because, you know, if you're working in that SME space in terms of companies, if they feel really turned off by a supplier, that can have a real detrimental effect to the more strategic transformational projects that I want to do. So yeah, I tend to lean away from it. And actually, we did acquire a business from Blackstone, and they did mention this buying consortium. And yeah, we decided to step away from it actually. But
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, Chris.